Hello, this is the Tolkien curmudgeon. I'm back with another video after a long hiatus. Why have I been gone so long? Because it's been very hard to motivate myself to make a video when the world is falling apart. Today I'd like to talk about the Children of Húrin, stitched together by Christopher Tolkien from fragments. And yet, enough greatness shines through for it to be one of the greatest of books written by the good professor. One of the reasons I love it is because it absolutely breaks the mold. I mean, if we read On Fairy Stories, the essay, we find out that the good professor believed that fantasy was essentially manifest in having a happy ending. Yes, and he called it the eucatastrophe, the unexpected turn of events which results in wonderfulness at the end. And this story is about as sad as it gets. In fact, in one of the earliest versions, when the reciter of the tale finishes the tale, everybody's weeping and crying, and it's like so sad that nobody can hardly even speak. I read the Silmarillion when it first came out, 1977. My mother bought 3 copies, pre-ordered, and when it arrived, I sat down on the sofa in the living room and I read the book. And I read it as quickly as I could, and basically I didn't notice anything except for the chapter on Beren and Luthien. And the rest of the whole thing seemed to be taking place. I would describe it as if I were at the top of a bowl up on the hills surrounding Tumlad, and you look down and you saw this action happening far, 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 far away in the middle of this valley, these kind of little figurines of horses battling and thousands of people fighting far away that you didn't really get into and you couldn't understand and you didn't know anything about and you couldn't relate to. But the lay of Beren and Luthien, yes, that really moved me. And later when I read the book again, which was after many, many, many years, I thought, wow, how did I not even notice the story about Túrin? I mean, how could I have read it in high school and not thought, this guy kills his best friend and marries his sister? Did I not even notice that? What a horrible story, and I love it. Why? Because I read the story again when I was really down and out, and I thought, wow, Tolkien didn't just have a happy end, which of course isn't true of The Lord of the Rings either, because Frodo, he became like practically a madman. Anyway, I read that story and I thought, oh my. And then I read The Unfinished Tales, and I read Lay of the Children of Húrin. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic, great, deep. And so, this was long before the Children of Húrin book was published. I began to think, wow, if you take passages from the Silmarillion, and you take these passages from the Unfinished Tales version, and then you kind of like make photocopies and you stitch them together, and then you could like make this like version of be almost like a novel or a novella. And I did it. So I actually made the copies, the physical copies, and I cut them up and I pasted them together, and I made this like thing that you could read, and including the passages of the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, and I put that in there, and the story of Húrin and Huor's sojourn in Gondolin. But still I wasn't satisfied. So I decided I will type it out. I will type to make it look better. So I did. And by that time, well, we'd also gotten the Grey Annals and things like that, in which you could read the alternate version of the Battle of Unnumbered Tears and Tuath and Huor's sojourn in Gondolin with these small little phrases that had been changed. And then you could like cut those out and put those in there. And then I'd also read the alliterative verse version of Túrin's story. And I realized that, wow, the entire middle section about Túrin's going to Nargothrond with Gwyndor is only described in detail in the poem. And you just like skipped over in like a couple lines in the Silmarillion. So I proceeded to try to prosify the middle section of that poem, which I realized that Christopher Tolkien had done the same. That's how he wrote parts of the Silmarillion, was he took the poem and he changed it into prose. But he didn't do that section because it would be even more, and it'd be too long for the Silmarillion because I had to fit it in like one chapter in this book. And so I tried to do it, and the way I did it was like I typed out the poem, made this whole version of the poem, and then I took the poem, and then I like just started to like play around. I took sections and I changed the word order because I tried to make it more like normal English. And then I thought, oh, there's so many alliterating adjectives all over the place, and too many. It's like throw some of those out there, you know, like. And then I basically came up with the same story that was actually Tolkien's words, sometimes changing things like, you know, a flying participle could be turned into a dependent clause, or it could be a clause with a relative pronoun, could become a participial phrase, or these, you know, changing these things like that. And then I typed it all out, you know, and then I thought, I want this to be understandable to people who have never read the Silmarillion, so that I've got to write an introduction. Well, what am I going to use for introduction? Oh, I know. We'll use a section from the Annals of Amun, where it tells of the star kindler Elbereth rearranging the stars and putting Menelmakar as a sign of the swordsman of the sky who would one day come and deal death to Morgoth with his black sword, which I thought was a great antidote to the sad ending. I thought, actually, it has a happy ending. Turin will come back at the end of the world. And I thought I need a glossary so that you could understand the back history of the story up until that point. And it's sort of like, you know, getting into the territory that made Tolkien write the first version of the Silmarillion, you know, the sketch of the mythology. But I was doing it through a glossary of characters and so on. Well, anyway, I typed it all up, and I took images off the internet, and I put it in there, and I thought, well, you know, Christopher's never going to do this. He's already done the version in Unfinished Tales. He's never going to do this. I mean, I'll never try. I can't try to make money off it. That'd be violating copyright. But hey, I can still do it and distribute to friends or relatives. And so I did, and I showed it to them, and I realized, oh, it needs a lot of work, because there are some things that I didn't quite get right about, things about the geography that didn't match up with it. Oh, it was difficult. And then what happened? Like 2 years later, the Children of Húrin came out. Christopher did it! So I immediately checked. Oh, well, what happened? Oh, what about? And I was, oh no, it still doesn't have some things that are very important. So that's why it's still one of the books that most disappoints me, even though it's like my favorite story. What really disappoints me about the Children of Húrin? Well, number one is that we know as a fact that Tolkien wanted to extend the story of the Dragon Helm. Turin was going to recover that, and he was going to wear it in battle, the fall of Nargothrond. And when he faced off against Glaurung, he was going to have the helmet, and then Glaurung was going to like dare him to look him in the eye, and then he would take it off, and he would look at him, and so that would make it his fault, his pride. And you could clearly see that it was Turin falling to his own pride that made him look into the eyes of the dragon, be mesmerized, and then all the terrible events that followed after that. I really wanted that to be in there, but it wasn't. Another detail that I wondered about was, if you read in the Grey Annals, you find that there at least exists some versions of the story where Turin was in love with Finduilas. But Christopher's version, he's not. So what was the final version that Tolkien wanted? We don't know. The constituent texts that make up all of these things have not been published. Not in the way that the History of Middle-earth stuff was published. So we still don't really know. Yeah, why not? 2 love triangles in the story. Why not? I sometimes think, what was Christopher thinking? I don't know. But was it that he thought, we can't have 2 love triangles, that's repetition. Or he could have been thinking, Turin won't be sympathetic if he falls in love with Finduilas, and then that doesn't go well, and then he falls in love with his sister later. It's like, what? He has to have only one love. Well, wait a minute. It can't be his true love that was his sister. So I thought, no. His true love had to be Finduilas, and then it's the tragedy of all that happened to Finduilas that made him fall into, and the fact that he ran away and tried to help his mother because he was deceived by the dragon. And what he was really meant to do is just, I'm sorry for poor Gwyndor, but you know what? Turin was destined, his true destiny was to marry Finduilas and to be the other great pairing of Edain and Eldar, which he wasn't. And so Aragorn was the final fulfillment of that, I think. But anyway, so I think certain subtle points of the story were left out. And then finally, you can think, wait a minute, what about if the story continued on and you put all of the wanderings of Húrin in at the end there? And then you realize that the tale of the Children of Húrin, why Húrin is actually the main character there, not Túrin. And then Húrin at the beginning and then Húrin at the end. But it's just so horrible. You just think, how can you even bear to see what Húrin ended up doing? And you think, thank God Christopher left it out of the Silmarillion. But what if we said, no, let's put it in. Let's make the heavy story even heavier. Because you know what? J.R.R. Tolkien did come up with an alternative title. I mean, I don't really like the title, The Tale of the Children of Húrin. When you look at that title and you think, what is it about? I've got no idea. But he had another title, which was The Tale of the Curse of Morgoth. Yes. That's what it is. Yes. So my ultimate version is that it should be The Tale of the Curse of Morgoth. And it should tell all of that stuff, including the Dragon Helm. He fell in love with Finduilas. And the Wanderings of Húrin. And it should be called The Tale of the Curse of Morgoth. Because Túrin is like an archetype of fallen humanity, tragically doing evil even when he intends to do good. Túrin, what an amazing, amazing story. And then his father too. It's unbearable, really, but it is amazing. And it exonerates Tolkien from the false accusation that he only wrote happy stories where everyone lives happily ever after. He didn't. So anyway, I was terribly disappointed when it was finally published, The Tale of the Children of Húrin. I thought, what did Christopher do? He dropped the ball. Why didn't he? He could have just, look what he did with the Silmarillion. He wrote some, but nobody else could do it though. But someday, all of these texts will be in the public domain and we'll be able to play with them. Not me, I'll be dead before then. But anyway, someday people will be able to rummage through all these things and try to figure out what really happened in Nargothrond and Dor Lómin and the Forest of Brethil. Bye for now.